My mother threw my suitcase into the front yard while I was 8 months pregnant. Not placed, not set down, thrown. Hard enough that the zipper burst open and baby clothes spilled across the grass. Tiny socks, tiny blankets. Tiny little outfits I had bought from clearance racks because that was all I could afford. I can still see them. Blue fabric scattered across the lawn while my neighbors pretended not to watch. My father stood in the doorway behind her, arms crossed, face blank, like he was observing a stranger being removed from the property. Not his daughter, not his child, a stranger. And the worst part? Neither of them looked angry anymore. That came earlier. What I saw that day was something much colder. Disappointment. The kind that convinces itself it's morally superior. The kind that says, "We didn't abandon you, you forced us to do this." I was 18 years old, terrified, pregnant, alone. And I remember standing there holding my stomach while my daughter kicked inside me. Even now, 20 years later, I can remember exactly what I thought. Not what I said, what I thought. They're really doing it. Because until that moment, some stupid, hopeful part of me believed they would stop. That they'd have calmed down. That they would remember I was their daughter. That this would somehow become a dramatic family argument. Everyone laughed about years later. Instead, my mother pointed toward the street and said something I'll never forget. "You made your choice." Then she closed the door, just like that. No goodbye, no hug, no hesitation. The door simply shut, and my childhood ended. The funny thing is people hear stories like mine and immediately assume I was reckless, wild, out of control. The stereotypical troubled teenager.
I wasn't. Actually, I was the responsible child.
The quiet one, the boring one. The one teachers loved. The one relatives bragged about. The one who got good grades without being asked. My younger brother Ethan was the opposite. Somehow, he was still the favorite. If you've ever grown up in a family with a golden child, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The rules are different, always. When Ethan broke curfew, he was finding himself. When I came home 10 minutes late, I was irresponsible. When Ethan failed classes, he was under pressure. When I got an A-, my father asked what happened. The favoritism wasn't subtle, it wasn't hidden, it was simply accepted. Like weather, like gravity. Like something everyone knew existed but nobody discussed. And I spent years trying to earn my way around it. Big mistake. Because you can't earn fairness from people who already decided your role. My role was achievement. Ethan's role was affection. One gets applause, the other gets love. Guess which one matters more? The baby's father wasn't some mysterious older man. He wasn't married, he wasn't abusive, he wasn't a criminal. Honestly, if he had been, my story would make a lot more sense. His name was Ryan. And for a while, I genuinely believed we were going to build a life together. We met during my senior year of high school. He worked evenings at a grocery store near my school. Tall, funny, messy, dark hair. It's the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. Looking back, I don't think Ryan was evil. That's what makes it complicated. Cowards and villains often create the same damage. The difference only matters to historians. When I found out I was pregnant, Ryan cried. Not because he was happy, not because he was angry, because he was scared. I understood that. Hell, I was scared too. We were kids pretending to be adults. Suddenly there was a baby coming. A real baby, not a hypothetical one, not something from health class. A tiny human being that would depend on us for everything. For about 3 weeks, Ryan promised we'd figure it out. We talked about apartments, jobs, community college, baby names, future plans. And honestly, those conversations got me through the panic. Because when you're terrified, hope becomes addictive. Then Ryan's parents found out. Everything changed almost overnight. His mother hated me immediately, not politely. Not secretly, openly, aggressively. According to her, I had trapped her son. Apparently, I was some criminal mastermind who got pregnant intentionally at 18 because my long-term strategy involved working retail while raising an infant. Makes perfect sense. Ryan started pulling away after that. Texts became shorter, phone calls became less frequent. Plans became vague. The future we discussed started disappearing one excuse at a time. Then one Friday night, he came over. I remember the smell of rain outside, the sound of my father watching television in the living room, the way Ryan refused to look directly at me. That's how I knew. People always think breakups happen because of the words. They don't. The words come later. You know before they arrive. I don't think I'm ready. The sentence. The beginning of the end. I stared at him, trying not to cry, trying not to scream, trying not to beg, because some tiny piece of pride was still alive. What does that mean? Ryan rubbed his hands together nervously. It means I can't do this. The thing is, I actually respected him more before he started explaining. Because explanations are usually just cowardice wearing a suit. He talked for almost 20 minutes. Timing, pressure, stress, parents, responsibility, fear. 100 different words all meaning the same thing. I'm leaving. When he finally finished talking, I asked one question. Are you coming back? And the silence answered everything. That was the last time Ryan ever acted like a father. Technically, he paid child support later. Court ordered. Automatically deducted. But emotionally, he vanished. And honestly, that abandonment hurt less than what my parents did. At least Ryan was 18. At least Ryan was scared. At least Ryan was immature. My parents were grown adults. They knew exactly what they were doing. The pregnancy became public 2 weeks later. Small towns are fascinating. People can ignore real problems for decades. But give them a teenage pregnancy and suddenly they're investigative journalists. Church members started whispering. Neighbors started staring. Relatives started calling. My mother treated the entire situation like I'd personally declared war on the family. Every conversation became an interrogation. Every meal became a lecture. Every day became punishment. And through all of it, Ethan remained untouched. One afternoon, I remember sitting at the kitchen table while my mother listed everything I'd supposedly destroyed. Our reputation, their trust, my future, the family name. I wish I were exaggerating. She genuinely spoke like I had committed some historical crime. Then Ethan walked into the kitchen, half drunk. At 2 in the afternoon, my father laughed. Actually laughed. Rough night? That moment changed something inside me. Because suddenly I saw the whole system clearly. This wasn't about morality. It never had been. If it were about morality, Ethan would have been in trouble constantly. This was about image. I embarrassed them publicly. That was the unforgivable offense. Not being pregnant. Being visibly pregnant. There's a difference. And once I understood that, their behavior started making sense. Not acceptable. Just predictable. Predictable cruelty is easier to survive than confusing cruelty. At least you stop blaming yourself. The situation escalated quickly after that. My mother started insisting I give the baby up for adoption every day. Every conversation, every opportunity, it became an obsession. At first, she framed it as concern, then practicality, then responsibility. Eventually, she stopped pretending. You can't raise a child. I can try. You'll fail. That one hurt. Not because I believed her. Because she wanted me to. There's something uniquely painful about realizing your own mother roots against you. Not openly, not dramatically, quietly, constantly, like a person's waiting for a prediction to come true. One evening, about 6 weeks before I was kicked out, things finally exploded. The argument started over something stupid. They always do. I refused to meet with an adoption agency, that was it. A simple refusal. My mother reacted like I'd set the house on fire, screaming, crying, accusing the whole performance. Then my father did something worse. He stayed calm. Anger is easier to fight. Calm disappointment is a weapon. He sat at the kitchen table and said, "If you keep this baby, don't expect us to support you." I nodded. Okay. That surprised him. I think he expected fear, negotiation, compliance. Instead, I accepted it. Because by then I'd already realized support was mostly imaginary anyway. The room became very quiet. Then my father asked, "What are you going to do?" And for the first time in months, I answered honestly, "I'm going to raise my daughter." My daughter. The phrase felt powerful. Real. Mine. My mother started crying immediately, as if I'd announced a tragedy, and that was the moment they gave up on me. Not because I was pregnant. Because I stopped surrendering. People confuse obedience with love all the time. My parents certainly did. After that night, the atmosphere in the house became unbearable. Nobody spoke unless necessary. Meals happened in silence. Every interaction felt hostile. I spent most evenings alone in my room folding baby clothes and planning a future I couldn't afford. A future I wasn't qualified for. A future that terrified me. But it was mine. That's what mattered. Then something happened that made everything worse. Much worse. I found out my parents had been secretly speaking to adoption agencies behind my back. Not researching. Not gathering information, actively planning. One woman actually called the house asking for me. By name. Referring to conversations I never had. I remember standing in the kitchen holding the phone while my entire body went cold. Because suddenly I understood. They weren't trying to convince me anymore. They were trying to outmaneuver me. That realization scared me. Really scared me. For the first time, I started locking my bedroom door at night. Maybe that sounds dramatic. Maybe it was. But fear doesn't care about appearances. Fear cares about survival. A week later came the suitcase. The lawn, the neighbors, the slammed door, the end of my childhood. And standing there in that front yard with baby clothes scattered around me, I realized something terrifying. I had nowhere to go, no apartment, no savings worth mentioning, no partner, no plan, nothing. Just a pregnant 18-year-old girl holding a broken suitcase. The sun was setting. The neighbors were watching through curtains. And for the first time in my life, I genuinely understood what it meant to be alone. What I didn't know then was that being thrown out would become the best thing my parents ever did for me. Not immediately. Not even remotely. First, it was going to get much, much worse. Because that night, after everyone else abandoned me, the one person I never expected would betray me next was about to make a choice that would leave me completely homeless. And when it happened, I honestly didn't think I'd recover from it. The person who betrayed me next was my grandmother. At least that's what I thought at the time. And honestly, for years I hated myself for believing it. But when you're 18, pregnant, homeless, exhausted, and scared, you don't exactly process things rationally. You process them emotionally. And emotionally, it felt like everyone was abandoning me. I called Grandma first because she was the only person in the family who had ever made me feel safe. She lived 20 minutes away in a small white house, with a wraparound porch and flower beds she spent more time talking to than watering. Grandma wasn't warm in the traditional sense. She wasn't a hugger. She wasn't overly emotional, but she was steady. And sometimes steady is better than affectionate. I called her from a gas station parking lot while sitting inside my car surrounded by baby clothes and panic. When she answered, I started crying before I could even speak. Not because I wanted sympathy, because I was exhausted. The kind of exhausted that reaches your soul. Grandma, the silence on the other end told me she already knew. Small town information traveled faster than the internet. What happened? I explained everything. The argument, the suitcase, the lawn, the door slamming shut. By the time I finished talking, my throat hurt. I waited, desperately, for her to tell me to come over, to tell me everything would be okay, to save me. Instead, she sighed. A long, tired sigh. Then she said, "Your parents are upset." Those 4 words felt like getting punched. Because I wasn't calling to discuss their feelings, I was homeless, pregnant, alone, and somehow we were still talking about them. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands hurt. Grandma, I think everybody needs time. Another useless word. The world is full of people who recommend patience when they're not the ones suffering. I don't have time, my voice cracked. I don't have anywhere to go. Another long silence. Then, maybe staying with me isn't the best idea right now. I actually stopped breathing, just for a second. Then she continued talking, explaining, justifying, rationalizing, but I couldn't hear most of it, because one sentence kept echoing through my head. Maybe staying with me isn't the best idea right now. And suddenly my last safety net disappeared. When the call ended, I sat there staring through the windshield while cars moved around me. People living normal lives. People buying snacks, getting gas, running errands. Meanwhile, my entire future was collapsing. I thought about sleeping in my car, seriously. For several hours, that was the plan. Sleep in the car. Figure things out tomorrow. Simple, terrible, but simple. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Thank God I didn't. It was my high school friend, Melissa. And what happened next changed everything. Not because Melissa saved me. Because she didn't. Not exactly. What she offered was a couch. A tiny couch. Inside a tiny apartment she shared with 2 other women. Hardly a rescue. But when you're drowning, a floating piece of wood looks like a yacht. I arrived around 10 that night. Melissa hugged me immediately, and I almost broke down again. Not because of the hug. Because she didn't ask questions first. She didn't lecture me. She didn't judge me. She simply helped carry my bags upstairs. Sometimes kindness is most powerful when it isn't dramatic. For the next 6 weeks, I slept on that couch. 6 weeks. The apartment smelled permanently of instant noodles and laundry detergent. 3 adults shared one bathroom. The refrigerator made weird noises at night. The couch springs dug into my back. And it was the safest place I'd ever lived. Funny how that works. Nobody there loved me. Nobody there was family. Nobody there had any obligation toward me whatsoever. Yet somehow they treated me better than the people who raised me. Life has a cruel sense of humor. My daughter arrived 3 weeks early, at 3 in the morning, naturally, because babies never respect schedules. I remember waking up with pain that felt wrong, not dramatic movie pain, just wrong, different, sharp. Melissa drove me to the hospital wearing pajamas and one shoe because she'd rushed out so fast. One shoe. To this day, that's one of my favorite memories. Because real love isn't grand. Real love shows up half-dressed at 3 in the morning. The labor lasted 13 hours. 13 terrifying hours. I was 19 by then, still broke, still scared, still completely unprepared. But the second they placed my daughter in my arms, everything changed, not magically, not perfectly, just enough. Her name was Lily, 7 pounds, tiny nose, tiny fingers, angry little cry, most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And for the first time in nearly a year, I felt hopeful. Then reality returned. Hospital bills, diapers, formula, rent, childcare, life. Hope is wonderful. Unfortunately, landlords prefer money. The first 2 years were brutal. There's really no cinematic way to describe it. Just brutal. I worked mornings at a diner, evenings at a grocery store, weekends wherever I could. Sleep became optional. Food became negotiable. Everything revolved around survival. Some months I cried when bills arrived. Other months I cried because they didn't. Because no mail-meant collection agencies had finally found my new address. I became very familiar with fear. Not dramatic fear, ordinary fear, the kind millions of people experience every day. Fear of rent, fear of illness, fear of car repairs, fear of one bad week destroying everything. And through all of it, my parents never called. Not once. Birthdays passed, silence, holidays passed, silence. Lily's first steps, silence. First words, silence. It's amazing how quickly people can convince themselves someone doesn't exist. Eventually, I stopped expecting anything, which helped. Expectation is where most suffering lives. By 23, life finally stabilized, not improved. Stabilized. Big difference. I had 1 job instead of 3, a small apartment instead of a couch, reliable childcare. reliable transportation, the basics. And honestly, the basics felt luxurious. Then something happened that completely blindsided me. My father called. 4 years, 4 entire years. Then suddenly my phone lit up with his name. I remember staring at the screen, frozen, because I genuinely thought somebody had died. People don't disappear for 4 years and randomly call. Not unless something happened. My hands were shaking when I answered. Hello? Silence. Then how are you? I actually laughed, a real laugh. Sharp, disbelieving, 4 years. And that's the opening line? How are you? Like we'd spoken yesterday. Like he hadn't watched his daughter become homeless. Like he hadn't chosen pride over family. The conversation lasted 7 minutes, 7 pointless minutes. No apology. No accountability, no responsibility, just awkward small talk. Then came the real reason for the call. Of course there was a reason, there always is. Ethan needed money. I wish I were joking. 4 years of silence. Then suddenly Ethan needed money. Apparently he dropped out of college, started several businesses, failed at all of them, accumulated debt, made terrible decisions, the usual Ethan experience. And somehow my father believed I should help. Me, the daughter he abandoned, the daughter working 60 hours a week, the daughter raising a child alone. That conversation taught me something important. Favoritism doesn't disappear when children become adults. It evolves. The golden child remains golden. The scapegoat remains useful. Different age. Same script. I said no politely, firmly. And for the first time in my life, I heard disappointment in my father's voice directed toward me instead of Ethan. Honestly, it felt wonderful. Not because I enjoyed hurting him. Because I finally stopped earning approval that never existed. The call ended badly, predictably. Then 6 months later, my mother called, then my aunt, then another relative, and slowly a pattern emerged. Ethan was becoming a disaster, a really expensive disaster, failed businesses, loans, credit cards, bad investments. Every time he crashed, my parents rescued him, again and again and again. Sound familiar? Meanwhile, I kept working. Saving, building slowly, painfully, 1 inch at a time. And here's the thing nobody tells you. Hard lives create competent people. Comfortable lives often don't. Every struggle taught me something. Budgeting, negotiating, problem solving, resilience. While Ethan learned how to be rescued, we were receiving completely different educations. At 30, I opened my first childcare center. Tiny operation, nothing impressive. 12 children, 1 building. 1 dream, but it was mine. Every dollar came from sacrifice. Every wall, every toy, every chair, mine. And Lily God. Lily was incredible, smart, funny, kind, everything I worried I might ruin. Sometimes I'd watch her sleeping and feel overwhelmed by gratitude. Not because life became easy, because we survived. Together. But while my life was finally moving forward, somewhere else, a slow-motion disaster was building. A disaster named Ethan. And 20 years after my parents threw me out, that disaster was finally about to destroy them. The same parents who abandoned me. The same parents who chose him. The same parents who spent decades rescuing him. They just didn't know it yet, but their favorite child was about to take everything they had. And when they finally came begging for help, the decision they made on my front lawn 20 years earlier would come back to haunt them. The first time my parents showed up at my office, I didn't recognize them. I know that sounds cruel, but 20 years changes people, especially people carrying the weight of their own decisions. My mother looked smaller, older, fragile. The sharp confidence she used to wear like armor was gone. My father looked exhausted, not physically tired, defeated, like life had finally collected a debt he'd spent decades avoiding. I was 40 years old, owner of 3 childcare centers, a staff of nearly 60 employees, a waiting list that stretched for months, a daughter preparing to graduate college, and somehow, the sight of my parents standing in my reception area still made me feel 18 for a second. Just 1 second. Then it passed. Because I wasn't 18 anymore. I wasn't standing in a front yard holding a broken suitcase. I wasn't homeless. I wasn't scared. I wasn't begging for approval. Those versions of me were gone. My receptionist called my office. There's a couple here asking for you. The second she gave their names, I knew. Something terrible had happened. Not because they came together. My parents hadn't willingly done anything together in years. If they were standing side by side, life had backed them into a corner. I walked into the lobby. The second my mother saw me, she started crying. Of course she did. Some people use tears like punctuation. I simply stared, waiting. Neither of us moved, neither of us spoke. 20 years of history stood between us. Finally, my father cleared his throat. We need to talk. There it was. Not, we're sorry. Not, how have you been? Not, can we see our granddaughter? We need to talk. Always straight to the problem. Always straight to the need. I almost laughed. Instead, I led them into a conference room. The room felt awkward immediately. My mother sat down carefully. My father remained standing. Classic. Even after 20 years, they still looked like the same people. Just older, damaged, worn down. Life eventually does that to everyone. Finally, I asked, what happens? A long one. Then my father said the words I'd been expecting for years. It's Ethan. Of course it was Ethan. Who else could it possibly be? Even now, even after 2 decades, the story always started with Ethan. I leaned back in my chair. What's he done? My mother covered her face. My father looked away. And suddenly I realized something. This wasn't another failed business. This wasn't another debt problem. This was bigger, much bigger than he told me. And honestly, even I was shocked. Over the previous 6 years, Ethan had systematically destroyed them. Not intentionally, not maliciously. Just through a lifetime of irresponsibility protected by unlimited forgiveness. First came failed businesses, then personal loans, then home equity loans, then refinancing, then investment opportunities, then emergency bailouts. Every time he failed, my parents saved him. Every single time, because that's what they'd always done. The problem with rescuing someone from consequences is eventually the consequences become larger than you. And Ethan had become enormous. Apparently, he'd convinced my parents to co-sign multiple loans, invest in multiple ventures, mortgage property, liquidate retirement accounts, cash out savings, everything. My father pulled out a folder, the kind of folder that contains bad news, lots of bad news, bank statements, foreclosure notices, debt summaries, legal documents. The numbers were staggering, not because Ethan stole from them, because they handed it to him willingly. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, gone, retirement funds, gone, savings, gone. The family house, gone, everything. And suddenly I remembered standing in that front yard 20 years earlier, pregnant, terrified, watching them choose Ethan over me for the 1,000th time. Only now the bill had arrived. 20 years late, but right on schedule. My mother started crying harder. He promised. I held up a hand. No, silence, we're not doing that. She looked confused. I continued. I'm not listening to excuses for Ethan. That sentence hit hard, really hard, because suddenly nobody could hide behind family mythology anymore. Not the golden child, not the devoted parents, not the misunderstood son, just reality. My father looked ashamed. For the first time in my entire life, actually ashamed. Then he said something I never expected to hear. We were wrong. 3 words, simple, direct. 20 years too late, but real. And honestly, that hurt more than excuses because excuses are easy to reject. Truth is harder. My mother looked at me through tears. We should have helped you. I didn't respond because there wasn't anything to say. The past doesn't change because somebody finally admits it happened. The scars don't disappear. The years don't come back. Lily's childhood still happened without grandparents. My homelessness still happened. My fear still happened. Truth matters, but timing matters too. Then my father finally revealed why they came. The actual reason, the real reason, and suddenly everything made sense. We need somewhere to stay. There it was, the ask. I knew it was coming. Of course it was coming. People don't drive across town to confess mistakes. They drive across town because they need something. Apparently, the foreclosure process was almost complete. They had 60 days, maybe less, no savings, no retirement, no backup plan, no Ethan, because Ethan had disappeared months earlier, just vanished, stopped answering calls, stopped responding to messages, gone. It's the same way they'd once told me to leave. Funny. Life really does have a sense of humor. The room became very quiet. I looked at my parents, really looked at them, and suddenly 2 versions of reality existed at once. One version showed elderly people who were scared, broken, alone. Another version showed the couple who threw their pregnant daughter into the street. Both were true. That's the difficult part about family. People are rarely just one thing. My mother reached across the table. Please! That word nearly broke me. Not because I wanted revenge, because I remembered begging too. 20 years earlier, terrified, pregnant, alone, and nobody helping nobody. I excused myself and walked out of the room. Not dramatically, I just needed air. Outside, I sat in my car for almost an hour, thinking, remembering, questioning everything. Then I called Lily. My daughter had always been smarter than me emotionally. Maybe hardship does that. Maybe perspective. I explained everything. The visit, the foreclosure, the request, the apology. Then I asked the question haunting me. What would you do? Silence. Then Lily answered, and her answer changed everything. Mom. Yeah, you don't owe them punishment. I sat quietly. Then she continued. But you don't owe them rescue either. God, sometimes children become the adults. I stared through the windshield. Listening. You spent 20 years saving yourself, she said. They spent 20 years saving Ethan. Silence. Then, both choices have consequences. That sentence hit harder than anything else, because it was true. Brutally true. I drove back inside, walked into the conference room, sat down. My parents immediately looked hopeful, which made this harder, much harder. Then I spoke, carefully, calmly, honestly. I won't let you move in with me. My mother started crying instantly. My father closed his eyes, but I continued. Because I wasn't finished. I won't give you money either. More tears, more disappointment, more pain. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't managing their emotions. That responsibility belonged to them, not me. Then I slid a piece of paper across the table. An address, a phone number, a contact name. They looked confused. It's a senior apartment community. Silence, I already called. More silence. There are openings. My father stared at me. My mother stopped crying. Neither seemed to understand. So I explained. I'm not rescuing you. I paused, but I'm not abandoning you either. And suddenly, for the first time all day, the room felt different. Because there was no revenge, no cruelty, no dramatic punishment, just boundaries. Healthy boundaries. The thing my family had never understood. My parents moved into that apartment 2 months later. Small place, nothing fancy, nothing luxurious, but safe, affordable, manageable, and surprisingly, things slowly changed after that. Not overnight, not magically, but gradually. My parents started calling occasionally. Not to ask for things, just to talk. My father apologized more than once. Real apologies, specific apologies. The kind that acknowledged damage instead of avoiding it. My mother struggled more. Guilt does strange things to people. But eventually she apologized too. And Ethan? Nobody heard from him for almost 3 years. Then one day a postcard arrived. Arizona, no return address, just a few lines. Still chasing another business idea. Still blaming everyone else. Still Ethan. I laughed for 10 minutes after reading it. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. Some people never change. And honestly, that stopped being my problem a long time ago. A year later, Lily graduated college, top of her class. First in our family, the ceremony was beautiful. The weather was perfect, and sitting beside me in the audience were my parents. Older, quieter, different, not fixed, just different. When Lily crossed the stage, my mother cried. My father cried too. He tried hiding it, failed miserably. Afterward, we took pictures together. Not because everything was healed, because life had moved forward. There's a difference. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone on my back porch, watching the sunset, thinking about the strange path my life had taken. And suddenly, I realized something. The greatest revenge never happened. Not really. My parents losing everything wasn't revenge. Ethan disappearing wasn't revenge. Watching them struggle wasn't revenge. The real revenge happened years earlier. The moment I refused to become what they expected. The moment I survived. The moment I built a life without them. The moment my daughter grew up knowing love wasn't conditional. That's what mattered, not their downfall. My success. Because 20 years earlier, they looked at a pregnant teenager and saw failure. And 20 years later, they walked into my office asking the daughter they abandoned for help. Not because I got lucky. Not because karma intervened. Because every day for 20 years, I got up and kept going. One step, one shift. One bill, one sacrifice, one decision at a time, and in the end, that made all the difference.